So we've introduced Venturi, and now we'll look at the earlier work. There's something they say about Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright died in 1959. But I like to say if Frank Lloyd Wright had died in 1910, almost 59, almost 60 years earlier, he still would have been an architect of major importance. And I can't get my water open here. There we go. And so Wright had really established a lot of his major ideas early in his career. And we can say the same thing about Venturi. In a way, we could make this the only lecture on Venturi. So we're going to see some cool stuff later, but a lot of the ideas are already hinted at here. So, reiterating from last week, Venturi was born in 1925, which makes him, 90 years old. Went to Princeton, where the other architects of his generation went to Harvard and studied with Walter Gropius, founder of the Bauhaus, who was then at Harvard. And in a Beaux-Arts tradition, head of the school was Jean Labiture. He taught at the University of Pennsylvania and is considered part of what we call the Philadelphia School. In 1966, he published his most important book, Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. He didn't really like teaching. And he, after Penn, he only taught briefly and then lectured, but stopped teaching. He was regarded as an antagonist of modern architecture and father of postmodern architecture. But he insists he's continuing the true program of modern architecture. We associate Mies van der Rohe with the phrase, less is more. Venturi responds, less is a bore. Now, it's really been about Bob and to some extent Integrated City Planning, his wife Denise Scott Brown, but his firm has had various iterations. It was Venturi and Short, then it became Venturi and Rauch, and finally it became Venturi, Scott Brown and Associates. And that firm very recently ended, before we get to its ending, they were a partnership. This is they're very interested in pattern on the surface of things. And whereas we say, the truth is in the depths, well, you can't judge a book by its cover. Venturi's all about the cover. You can't judge a book by its contents. So we'll get to what this dress is about and what these chairs are about later. Let's just read this and give us a sense. Venturi, Scott Brown and Associates is almost alone in continuing the project of modernism. So they, despite their association with postmodernism, claim to be in the modernist tradition, engaging in artistically unpreconceived way the real conditions of contemporary society. Now that's the trick with Venturi. Remember last week we said, why does he advocate complexity and contradiction in architecture? Why complexity and contradiction? Right. Life is complex and contradictory. The world is complex and contradictory. Reality is complex and contradictory. And architecture should be a part of life, the world, and reality. Now, he says the real conditions of contemporary society, but we go beyond that and just say reality. A contemporary society, construction, and culture that they have found Rome, art history, and unmodern moderns such as Lutyens helpful has confused even with Myers. So they look at Rome, they look at art history, and remember, Walter Gropius had famously banned books from the Bauhaus. The library was in his office under lock and key because he didn't want people looking at the past, because at that time, you looked at Roman architecture and you imitated it, and they were running a revolution. They didn't want people imitating Roman architecture. They wanted people to work, to respond to modern society and modern industrial materials. Well, Venturi says, you know, there's a lot more we can learn from Rome than to imitate its columns. A lot more we can learn from art history. And then there are people who were in the modern period but have been rejected by modern architects, such as Lutyens. We'll look at him later in the course, where we can learn a lot of cool stuff. In some ways, it would have been better if they hadn't written about it. They might never have been credited with unleashing postmodernism. So they are labeled postmodern, and they say, no, we're in the modern tradition. A charge comparable to calling Thomas Edison the father of disco. Yeah, he invented electricity, he developed ways to distribute electricity and electrified the world, invented the light bulb, the incandescent light bulb, but that's only peripherally leads us to disco. So same thing about Venturi. Well, that firm is now gone. They're both retired, Bob and Denise, and there's a firm of VSBA, Venturi, Scott, Brown Associates, but it's now VSBA. These are younger architects who had worked with them who now have a firm which they claim carries on the traditions and principles that they developed. And if you're interested, you can go to the VSBA website and see if you agree that they are doing that. So here they are, younger, college yearbooks. Bob Venturi, Denise Scott Brown. Here they are 10 years ago, much older, and now 10 years later they're older still. And here is when they first got together and were, they met at the University of Pennsylvania and dated for quite a while, then finally got married, and the firm became Venturi Scott Brown. Can anybody tell me what this is? Yeah, it's a pencil sharpener. Do you guys still use that? So you have a mechanical pencil with a thick, about 1/8 inch diameter lead. You extend the lead and then go in there and put a sharp point on it. So, you know, some things disappear. There you go. And in a way, we have to start a discussion of Venturi with, quote unquote, the failure of modern architecture. So modern architecture, obviously in a certain way, is everything that happens, pick a date, after 1900. But, and so there's a lot of that. But there's sort of a kind of sterile international style architecture that tends to take over. And maybe that's what we mean when we say failure of modern architecture, the failure of that stuff, that international style. So major awareness of international style comes to America with an exhibit in 1932 at the Museum of Modern Art on the international style. It was organized by Henry Russell Hitchcock and Philip Johnson, and they also wrote the book or catalog for the show. And it featured architecture like Villa Savoye and the Barcelona Pavilion. That's sort of what we mean by international style. Steel and glass and white box. Here we have a steel and glass box, 1949. Sort of, launching the architecture that's to come to dominate the United States after World War II. Takes it just a while to get in gear. War ends in 45. But Philip Johnson is independently rich. He just died a few years ago in his 90s. But he was rich so that he didn't have to wait for a client. He wanted to launch this aesthetic. He built his own house on his own land in New Canaan, Connecticut, suburb of New York. And it really put him and modern architecture on the map. Now, in this circle here is the bathroom. So at least that's private. But the bed is over here, and the living room's over here. How do you function in a house like this? Well, the secret is there's another house over here made out of brick with tiny little round windows, and that's where he really slept. But the other thing is that he owns a lot of acreage. So it's not like the street is right out here. The street's pretty far away. So it's a large estate. I'll pass this over. But isn't there, what about the subtleties of the functions that go on in a house? Aha, there is public and private. So here, 3 years later, the Wiley House by Philip Johnson. So public, living room up here, private, bedrooms, bathrooms down here. What's wrong with that? There's a lot more subtle things going on in it. There's more than two things going on in a house. There's all kinds of activities, all kinds of degrees of public and private. There are all kinds of relationships between activities. And what Mies does, and in this stage in his career, Philip Johnson's picking up on that, is to hyper-simplify the program to justify this kind of stark, over-simplistic architecture. So this is what Venturi's going to mean by less is a bore, as we said last week, our office buildings have to be able to withstand the cigarette machine in the lobby. You know, what about, maybe this is a vacation house for rich people without children. But what if you have a real family? You know, there's kids' rooms and parents' rooms and playrooms and kitchen, and maybe kitchen's a big, maybe there's more than one kitchen if you're rich. There's the kitchen that's kind of a public space that all the guests are hanging out at, and the kitchen that's a little nook where you make breakfast in the morning just for the family. There's all kinds of subtle, where do you put the bicycles? You know, there's all kinds of stuff that goes on in life that this is able to be this simple and this even more simple by denying those things, by denying that life is complex and contradictory. So this international style architecture takes over, let's say it's launched in New York. First all glass skyscraper, 1953, by Skidmore, Owens and Merrill, and then 5 years later, the Siegel Building by Mies van der Rohe. So this is not the first, but it's the one we would, say what we would take as our example. And we're kind of excited about this. This is cool, it's new, it's dark, but then it just starts marching through the city. And, isn't this kind of sterile? I mean, what about how the building meets the ground, how the building meets the sky? Some little bit of entertainment for the eye, and so there starts to be a turning against it, and then starts marching around the world. And so people start to question it. In addition, this is something called the Total Theater by Walter Gropius. This is from the 30s. But how might a theater work? And he says, well, there's different kinds of plays. What if you want proscenium stage? What if you want, here's the stage and the audience is looking at it. But then what if you want a theater in a round? What if you want a theater off-center and around? And so this rotates, and seats can drop and become stage. So he says, you can have any kind of theater experience, or these three, in this theater. So this is the universal theater. This would be anywhere, anytime, any place you need a theater, this building will do it. Really? This is what you build in Africa? This is what you build in Saudi Arabia? This is what you build in New York? You don't get, in New York, the street is here. You don't get a block all to yourself. So it's idealized, but not really responsive to context, culture, symbolism, history, meaning. What does a theater mean in London as opposed to Cincinnati? London has this monster theater tradition. And this is obliterating all that for something that's maybe very functional. Let's not argue and say it is. But is that all architecture is? Doesn't it deal with meaning, history, symbolism, context, and culture, as well as function? So this was very much in vogue when I was in school, and there were such phrases as the solution to the school. So what's wrong with that? What kind of school for what kind of people in what location? There is no the solution to the school. You have suburban kids, inner city kids, kids in Saudi Arabia, kids in Nairobi, kids in London. Very different schools. There's no the solution to the school or the solution to the house. So this universalism, or claim of universalism, is one of the things that Venturi and other critics of modern architecture are objecting to. And so we have a series of books: Brent Boland, The Failure of Modern Architecture; Peter Blake, Form Follows Fiasco; Jane Jacobs, Death and Life of Great American Cities. There were a dozen books that came out around this time, mid-60s, early mid-60s, saying, whoa, modern architecture hasn't worked. And one of those books is Venturi's Complexity and Contradiction in Architecture. I found, they moved my office a while back, and all my books are still in boxes. So I couldn't find my copy. I have many copies of this. So I had one at home, but I forgot to bring it. So maybe next week I'll remember to bring it. How many people bought this book? Okay. In the future, I got to crack the whip. It is a required book, but you guys got other things to worry about. Now, let's look at Venturi's career. And we talked about how how does your career as a young architect start? And you get really probably rinky-dink commissions. 1958, this is one of the mansions from Millionaires Row on Fifth Avenue, where there were these great mansions. Most of them now gone. The ones that are remaining are typically art galleries or consulates and a couple of museums like the Cooper Hewitt. But this is the Duke House, owned by NYU. It's where they have their fine arts department. And Venturi does a renovation. So here's the interior, very Beaux-Arts decorated. And 1958, what most architects would have done is put up sheetrock, cover all this, and make it a white cube. Or at least paint it all white, make it go away. Venturi doesn't do that. He just totally leaves it alone. And he puts his addition in as temporary displays. We're guests here in the long history of architecture. At this time, we were aggressively tearing these things down. These are, you know, this old-fashioned architecture. What is that? Tear it down. He's respecting it. And inside, he puts in these shelves. So, well, at least, you know, let's get fine woodworking craftsmen to make elegant wood shelves. No, he goes and gets, you know, goes to Staples, quote unquote, and gets temporary steel shelves and puts these little pads here to show they're separate from the existing architecture. And then we need architecture. So yeah, let's have these forms, which are just big light fixtures. And then, well, we need modern furniture. Well, this is a Thonet chair. Pioneer modernism, because this is the first mass-produced, one among the first mass-produced industrialized furniture. And Le Corbusier used this. It's called a Corbusier because he used it in one of his pavilions in the 30s. So all of these sophisticated games he's playing with this rinky-dink commission that he's got. So what do you believe? What are you about? How are you, what do you stand for architecturally? And if this is the opportunity you have, make your statements in the opportunity you have. So, concepts addressed, preservation and restoration. Those terms didn't exist. You didn't there was no preservation. They 5 years later they tore down Penn Station, which was like Grand Central, and then they tried to tear down Grand Central, and people had to rise up and create whole movements against these movements. These windows here are single pane, they're not double pane. Does anybody know why? We're in a preservation neighborhood. You're not allowed to, we can change the interior of Pratt, but we can't change the exterior. It has to look the same. Now, we had a fire burn down the middle. We got special permission for the Stephen Holt. Oh, Stephen Holt, so wonderful that we will permit you to do that. But you can't change anything in this neighborhood on the exterior of a building because we now respect preservation. That didn't exist. And then respect for architectures. Okay, the Beaux-Arts is a particular tradition. We're not doing that anymore, but something that was done in the past that we can respect. Next project, rinky-dink career here. Renovation of a coffee shop on campus. Now you go over this, the Pratt Coffee Shop and Mike's on the neck a block away from here. Mike's was renovated by a former dean of the school. That's the kind of commission you get. The local coffee shop needs a renovation. Let's check out the architecture school. Venturi gets the commission. And what does he do? He puts this incredible sign here. You're not supposed to have signs on architecture. Well, you remember I showed you the picture of the Bauhaus building? It's got a sign on it. And he's got these angles going on here. You come in here and there's a sharp angle again. He's got all kinds of, and then a symbol of a coffee cup. So we come in here, we've got an angle, then we've got another sharp angle here. We come in, we have these two very long, narrow forms, because this was two townhouses put together. So he makes a kind of statement about the length. Look at how long and thin it is. And he doesn't try to disguise. I mean, I used to eat in here all the time, and it's like, is there a mirror here? How long is this? No, it's just really long. Then, here are the Thone chairs again. Thone is a tradition of industrial, mass-produced, using, at the time, modern technology of bent wood, commercial chairs. And then these are warehouse lamps, industrial warehouse lamps. But they have this cool form, so they're like sculptural forms. And then the edge of the booth is like a sculpture. And then we have this kind of repeated, monotonous art of the salt shaker, the pepper shaker, the sugar, and the ketchup. Boom, 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 boom. And John Cage used to say, John Cage was a modern musician, very weird, worked in the 40s through the 60s, and he would do something like beep bop bop boom, beep bop bop boom, beep bop bop boom boom. It would go on for 20 minutes. And he would say, if you find 20 minutes boring, try it for an hour. So, and then there's something that was real hot through the 60s called super graphics. We have these tremendous letters. They put it in subways and stuff. And it originates here. Okay, we've got to have ornament here. We have a really restricted budget. What's the cheapest way you can ornament the wall? Paint, right. But let's do something, you know, decorative about it. Now, does anybody know where these letters come from? What did we do before we had computers? We had press type. Anybody know what press type is? It's a sheet. Yeah, and you put it down and you rub it, and it puts the A down, and then you go get the B and you rub it. What did we have before press type? Press type came in around 1960. What did we have before press type? Metal stencils. So you went and you had a whole alphabet of different sizes, and so you needed a set of 20. How many letters are in the alphabet? 26. So you needed a set of about 30 stencils because you need periods and commas and stuff. And you had maybe 4 different typefaces and 4 different sizes. So that's 16 of these things, and they're expensive. And what was the coolest one that you want to show people you're cool? Designed by Corbu. This is Corbu's stencil. This is Corbu's alphabet. So there's all this stuff going on in a seemingly stupid coffee shop renovation. So this is Corbu's stencil. He's making a statement here. He's tying himself into tradition, orthodox modern architecture, even while he's rebelling against it. So, concepts. The sign in architecture. The ordinary, slightly out of context. So, there's a Grand's restaurant, Grand's. Yeah, but there's something wrong with this. Isn't it too big? And this coffee cup. What the hell? You can imagine, okay, this is a coffee cup on a coffee shop. Isn't that kind of big? Isn't that kind of a weird design? So it's the ordinary, slightly off, slightly out of context. So if you're really oblivious, you might not notice it. But if you're a bit astute, you say, well, there's something going on here. Next project, he found a sucker, his mother. Says, Ma, you need a new house, right? Let me do a house for you. So 1964, it's technically the Kahn Venturi house, but we typically call it Venturi's mother's house. So what's the first thing we notice that's different here? Everybody's making flat roofs, modern. That glass house we saw. Philip Johnson, Walter Gropius, Marcel Breuer are all doing houses in New England. Philip Johnson in Connecticut and New York, and then Breuer and Gropius typically in Massachusetts because they teach at Harvard. And there are these somewhat Americanized versions of the European white box that they had pioneered in Europe in the 1930s. And we're saying, well, I guess this is what the house of the future should be. It's based on the white box. Venturi comes along and totally does something different. Now, let's see what he's doing here. Well, here it is. And there's a lot of weird stuff going on. There's a window stuck in here. It's a really funny shape for the chimney. There's a row of windows here. Steel column behind the glass. This window is too big. And I'm not going to go into the plan. If you get into this house, so let me briefly at the end of today, and I'm going to leave early so we get out, because I have a conference to go to. But you've got to you have to pick a Venturi building or a Kahn building and compare it with another building for an analysis project for the course. That and the final exam are key grading points. So, if you pick this house, you might go into some detail about what's going on in the plan. I'm not going to talk about that, except to mention, you come up the stairs and thud, you run into a wall. So now you got to go around. So just these weird, little weirdosities going on here. Sort of a reference to Palladio's Villa Malcontenta going on here in the back. Here we see where this funny shape for the chimney comes from. Here's a stair, you come up thud, and then you got to go around. But I'm going to look at the imagery. So here's Villa Savoie, 1931, Le Corbusier. This is what a modern house should look like, right? So this is the modern house. The two other icons of modern architecture, the Bauhaus building, which is a school, and the Barcelona Pavilion, which is a pavilion. So this is the modern house. Up on stilts, long window, flat roof, white box, abstract, no historical references. Venturi's going to not refer back to Corbu, but he is referring back to another historical tradition. Who's the architect of this? Correct. That's Frank Lloyd Wright's house for himself. So that's pretty important modern architect. And where did Frank Lloyd Wright get it? The shingle style, the Chandler house. Palladian window, two dormers. Oh, and then another shingle style house, the Low house. So Venturi is in historical context, but not the context of Corbu, Mies, and Gropius, but an American historical context. Now, the house is technically in the city of Philadelphia. It's in a suburban area. And this is a typical Northeastern American suburban home. What do we have? Sloped roof, chimney, window with lights. Lights are panes of glass. How do you like that? So we are responding to a historical context and a locational context. So if Venturi's doing this house in California, in Arizona, it would have been totally different. If Mies was doing the house in Arizona, Saudi Arabia, Pennsylvania, it would be a glass box, doesn't matter. And so he's introducing the idea of responding to context, historical context, locational context, and psychological context. Now, I'm going to make an assertion. Ask any child to draw a house, what will they draw? Now, who thinks I might not be right? How would you test this? My Israeli students used to say, no, in Israel it's got a flat roof. But if I say this is a house that any child would draw, how would we right now go test that idea? We'd log on to Google Image and we would type the house as any child would draw it. This is what I got. Am I right or am I right? I mean, there it is. So, this is not the house as any child would draw it. You say to a child, your house, what's the child going to imagine? This. What does Corbu give them? This. Now, it's not saying it's good or bad. It's different from what Venturi does. Venturi puts us in this tradition. Now, what's missing from my drawing? I made this drawing. What's missing from it? What did I leave out? Specifically, who's the most important family member? Mommy! So, let's put Mommy in. There's Venturi's mother. He's got it. he's got the whole thing. Now, I got this out of order. So what else did I miss here? What's in almost every one? Right, the tree. So Venturi puts in a sunflower because he's a mannerist architect. He plays games. A sunflower is too big to be a flower and too small to be a tree. So he's playing games with scale. So he's got the tree, the mommy, the house, the whole thing. Now, so he's got this stupid little house for his mother. And he's doing a whole thesis on what architecture is about. Now, the one thing you were not allowed to do in modern architecture is applied ornament. On the Seagram building are those vertical bronze things, mullions. And for a while, Mies was in trouble. So if those are ornament, he's in trouble. So no, they're there for stiffening wind against the wind. Windbreak. Then it was okay. You're not allowed in traditional modern architecture to have applied ornament. Everything must have a function. So Louis Kahn says, well, the joint can be our ornament. So the way he makes the joints of the precast concrete members of the medical towers is what he's giving us for ornament. If it grows naturally out of the materials and the construction, you can do it. But you applied ornament means it's just stuck on, has no function. So Venturi says, you know what? I'm going to just stick it on. So this is the first example of applied ornament in modern architecture, if you can consider this modern architecture. He's saying, I'm going to do applied, you're not supposed to do that, I'm going to do it. So you take a half round, you get a long trough, you soak the half round piece of wood in there for a day, so you can bend it, you bend it up there, nail, bump, 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 nail it in, and there's your applied ornament. And he's playing games. Well, it's symmetrical. On this side, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 windows. On this side, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 windows. But it's not symmetrical. So again, he's playing games. And then mannerism. This is too big to be a window. And what the hell kind of a chimney is this? So mannerism is playing games with you in a tradition that has rules, and then you bend or break those rules and play games with them. That's mannerism. So mannerism with a capital M is a period of Renaissance architecture. It goes early Renaissance, high Renaissance, Manners, Baroque. And mannerism with a small m, so I should have made that a small m, is that principle of breaking the rules in another period. So this is the Mannerist period of modern architecture. So we're going to see throughout Venturi's work, mannerism, complexity and contradiction, applied ornament, the almost ordinary, context, historical, locational, and psychological. And one more thing. Let's see if I have it here. No. Okay, I left something out of there. Anybody know what it is?
Walkway?
Say again?
Is it the walkway?
No, I left out humor. And this is, oh yeah, the walkway's really cool. So, let's see. Where's the good one? This will do. You come up the walkway and thud, you hit the wall. And you got to go over here to get in. And then thud, you hit the back wall because the door is right there. So let's go back to a plan. Let's see what I got. Whoops, sorry. Oh, this plan's not better. So the walkway takes us to here. Thud, we hit the wall. So then we come over and thud, we hit the wall again. We have to turn and go this way to get in. And even putting an angle, nobody put angles in architecture. They weren't allowed to put an angle in architecture. So we could make an entire course out of this building. And there's a book on this building, on Venturi's mother's house. And stuff I'm not going to go into is, this was, okay, now Venturi briefly worked for Louis Kahn. This was the first version of the house. We've got Kahn's grid, we've got Kahn's sort of little pavilions from the Trenton Community Center and bathhouse. This is very Kahn-esque, and it got rejected by the local building zoning board as not suburban enough. You can't make this thing in our neighborhood. So there's a whole story of how this house came about, which I'm not going into, but if you're interested, there is a book about it. So, Concepts addressed: historical context, regional context, psychological context, applied ornament, and humor, which I should put in here. Okay, 2 more projects. We'll get out early. The next thing you do, after you close the door, you're a young architect, you're starting your career, you want to, how do you get out there? You know, nobody's coming to you saying, do a 50-story office building in Manhattan. And one of the things you do is you enter competitions. So Venturi entered a lot of competitions. And sometimes, well, it's difficult to enter competitions because even if there's no fee, sometimes there are fees, but even if there's no fee, it's expensive to put this together. You probably have to hire some people, and then you've got, you know, a model maker maybe, and that can be really expensive. So, as we described, Venturi's parents owned a Italian specialty meats distribution company. So if you had Italian, you know, salamis and stuff in an Italian deli, they were the wholesaler that the deli got it from. Venturi's father died, so he ran the business. He ran the family business and then at night did the architecture, but that provided money. And that's how they could afford to do Venturi's mother's house and enter competitions. Well, we get up to the 1960s and there's no memorial for Franklin Delano Roosevelt. There's a Jefferson Memorial and a Washington Monument and a Lincoln Memorial. So we need an FDR Memorial, Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial in Washington. And there's a competition. So here's the basin. How many people have seen the cherry trees in Washington? Really beautiful. So these are the cherry trees. They're all the way around the basin here. Here's the Jefferson Memorial. And so here's the site. And so Venturi makes this long building. And it got noticed, but there was no way it was going to win. What the hell is this stupid thing? You know, where are the columns? So it's an anti-monumental monument. By the 1960s, we are no longer up for monumental celebrations of American, you know, wars. And we're sort of down on that stuff. So, okay, how do you do an FDR memorial? He says, well, it should be integrated into the landscape. So here's the water, trees, we come up and we go down, parking, back here, up and then down. It's burned into the landscape. And then what do we remember FDR for? His fireside chats. During the hardships of the Depression and World War II, he would talk to the American people over the radio. And so here are his words. And so it's very much part of the landscape. So the land comes in and just goes up. And then back here you need parking because people come from all over the country to visit Washington monuments. And so there's parking here, and then we hide the parking with ivy along here and then burned into the landscape. So when I say burned into the monument, burned into the landscape, what comes to mind? What's this? It's the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. by Maya Lin. And the landscape comes down and burned up here, and then there's this wall. And on this wall are carved the names of every American soldier who died in the Vietnam War. And it's one of the most beloved and visited monuments in Washington. And she did it while she was a student. She won the competition, Maya Lin, while a student, and still controversial to this day, but very widely beloved, and definitely coming off of Venturi's influence. How do you make an anti-monumental monument? So, concept addressed, the anti-monumental monument. So one more, and I told you we'd get out early, and this is Copley Square. So here is the Boston Public Library by, I think it's McKinney, in the Beaux-Arts style. And then here is Trinity Church by H.H. Richardson. And then there's a square. And this square has been sitting there empty, and is still sitting there empty because they couldn't decide on they still haven't figured out what to do. So here's Venturi's solution. Venturi says, we've got a contradictory situation. This is open space. Open space is good in a city because there's so little open space and you want some place to get relief. Open space is bad because in a city we want the architecture to define the street. These buildings are a wall for the street, and there's no wall here. It's like you come along and boom, you fall in there. It's like somebody's missing a tooth. There's a gap. So we don't want to block this because open space is good. We do want to block it because we want to continue the wall. How do you make something that both blocks and does not block? Trees. The trees make a visual wall, but you can walk through them. So we have now created a visual wall. We've defined the street, but at the same time, we haven't blocked anybody from anything. You can walk right in. Now, we want to landscape this, and people want to cut through here. Well, first we're going to make a miniature grid of the city. But people want to cut through here because, sometimes you want to cut across diagonally. And, this is a very interesting building. It's not symmetrical. And so you can't really take it all in because it's different on every side. So what if we make a model of the church in miniature? And now we can walk around that and comprehend this church. So here's our street grid of identical blocks, but because of the diagonals, they're identical blocks, but everyone's different. It's like Broadway cutting through Manhattan, making these triangular blocks. Some of them have alleyways going through them. So we have this regular grid, but no two. So you have a regular grid of identical squares, but everyone is different. And then we make two kinds of trees here that in their mature version, this one is a miniature model of this one. What? Isn't this like out of scale here? What is with this tree? So this is by some people regarded as one of the most successful urban designs, urban landscape designs, did not win, but still has a lot to teach to this day, just as the FDR Memorial by Venturi's influence on the Vietnam Memorial. Didn't win, didn't get built. And there was one objection to this that maybe it's a valid objection, and that is, anybody guess what it is? What's wrong with this? It obliterates our view of Trinity Church and of the library. So without these trees, you can stand here and see the church. And you can stand here and see the library. And now we lose those views. So that's a possible criticism of it. So, fundamentals of landscape architecture like paths, trees, etc., he's using in a fully understanding way.